What could be better than a collection of the works of Edgar Allan Poe? The answer is a television series based on the works of Edgar Allan Poe, combined with a curated collection of his stories and poems put in one volume, which inspired the show. Hey there, book dragons and Poe enthusiasts. I am really glad you're here with me today. I am about to talk to you about The Fall of the House of Usher and Other Collected Stories, which is an official collection of Edgar Allan Poe's works that inspired The Fall of the House of Usher on Netflix. And in this video, not only are you going to get a review of that particular collection, you are also going to get a review of the show. We're going to get to it. Please make sure if you enjoy this video, I would love it if you would like the video. I would love to have you as a subscriber to my channel if you have not done so already. And make sure you join my Discord so we can talk about these and other great stories there, okay? One of my plans for October was to read The Fall of the House of Usher because I knew the Netflix series was coming. And so I got out my handy-dandy Edgar Allan Poe collection and I turned to The Fall of the House of Usher and I started reading it there, and I'm just like, oh, you know, this isn't really working for me. The print's really small and it's kind of feeling like a chore to read, but I know it's a great story because I've read it before, so I just wasn't feeling the physical copy of it. And I've been wanting to look for a good ebook copy of Edgar Allan Poe. And so I was looking through Amazon and different places, and I'm like, oh, there's a collection specifically put together by Mike Flanagan of stories that inspired his adaptation. I'm like, you know, I think I'm going to get that. It wasn't very expensive, so I went ahead and bought it, and it was absolutely amazing. A lot of the stories in this book I had already read, and there were a few that I hadn't read before as well. I haven't read everything by Edgar Allan Poe yet. I was really happy to be able to sit down and just enjoy this little book with a curated collection of stories. And one thing that I really liked about it is at the very beginning, there's a foreword by the director, by Mike Flanagan, where he talks all about the different stories that inspired the show and what they took from it, and some of the little morsels that you wouldn't get anywhere else about how the show was made. And I thought that was really cool. So it's kind of like getting the director's thoughts on what they did to create this TV show. And aside from that, it's just a collection of Edgar Allan Poe stories and poems. There's nothing that's been changed, nothing was edited for the collection. It's just section after section of Edgar Allan Poe stuff. So you've got a lot of the classic Edgar Allan Poe staples like The Raven, The Telltale Heart, The Murders in the Rue Morgue, Tamerlane, Lenore, just a whole lot of great Edgar Allan Poe stories. And there's some in there that aren't the greatest. Like, there were a couple I was like, okay, you know, that wasn't that enjoyable. And those were the ones I hadn't read before and didn't realize weren't enjoyable until I read them. And they weren't bad, but they just were mediocre, you know, just not the greatest. But you've got all the classics that everybody raves about from Edgar Allan Poe, and it was just a really, really fun time experiencing that. And I wanted to get it done before the show came out. I didn't quite finish before the show came out, but that didn't matter because the ones I hadn't read yet, the show wasn't covering. And so I just really enjoyed being able to experience Edgar Allan Poe in this particular format. It made it a lot more interesting because I knew that I was going to go into a show that was going to utilize some of these elements. And I'll talk about the show here in a few minutes, but I can't tell you how awesome it was for me to be able to read The Raven again and to read The Telltale Heart again, and reading Murders in the Rue Morgue again. It's been a while since I've read all of those, and I just absolutely loved it. In fact, when I got to The Raven, which is at the end of this particular collection, I read it out loud to myself. Like I did my own theatrical production of The Raven, and it was just so great. The Raven is a great tale for reading out loud. And just to re-experience some of the really macabre gems that Edgar Allan Poe created, it was amazing. Now, of course, I do have the big one volume of all of his collected works, but I don't know, something about this was just special. Maybe it had to do with reading it on my Kindle. I'm sure that was part of it because it's a lot easier to read on my Kindle. It's a lot better for my eyes. I just enjoy the experience overall much better. But yeah, it was really neat because you're not having to wade through and find out all the page numbers of the stories that you're actually interested in, because it's all been collected for you in this one small volume. And of course, it's not exhaustive. Not all of Poe's tales are in this book. But I highly recommend checking out this particular volume, especially if you would like to hear about what the directorial process was for the show and how they handpicked these stories. And so now I think it's a good time to get to the show, and we will still talk about parts of the book because that plays into the show, right? So when I first heard that The Fall of the House of Usher was coming to Netflix, I was like, oh, that's great. The only problem is The Fall of the House of Usher isn't that long. How are they going to milk 8 episodes out of such a short little story? And the way it was done was absolutely brilliant, because it wasn't just The Fall of the House of Usher. That was the name given to the series, but it was more of a love letter to all of Edgar Allan Poe's most famous works. The Fall of the House of Usher is used as a frame story. You still have Roderick Usher. He's still the main character in the story, and he's still dealing with ghosts from his past. And there's still a second person in the story who is visiting with an ailing Roderick Usher because he's getting into poor health and he's close to his deathbed, and so he's recounting to this other person all of the horrors of his past that are now coming back to haunt him. And in the case of the show, the second person is Auguste Dupin, who is the detective from the murders in the Rue Morgue, but in this case, he's kind of like one of the main characters of the show that has become Roderick's confessor. And what has happened is Roderick Usher has 6 children that have died. And that's not a spoiler because they talk about it within the first few minutes of the first episode. That's how this whole thing is going to play out. It's Roderick telling about how each of his children died, and the fact that their mutilated ghosts are now haunting him. And so The Fall of the House of Usher is used as a frame story. So the first episode and the last episode are basically The Fall of the House of Usher, with other Edgar Allan Poe stories layered in between. Each of Roderick's 6 children are named after characters in different tales and poems that he wrote. And he also has a granddaughter named Lenore. And I'm not going to spoil anything for you, but you might have guesses as to what happens to her eventually. But anyway, there's 6 kids, and then one of them is the father of Lenore. And so each of the 6 children, as I said, is based off of one of Poe's characters. And some of those characters are specifically paired with their stories from Poe's collection. So for instance, Prospero, his particular episode that tells how he died, is based on the Mask of the Red Death. So the title is the Mask of the Red Death. Prospero is, of course, the prince that thinks he can escape death and throws this party behind closed doors, but death ends up showing up anyway. And so you can imagine what happens in the TV show for that particular episode. And there's another episode called The Murders in the Rue Morgue, and one of the children dies there. And it's just this progression of Roderick Burgess losing all of his children in some way, shape, or fashion tied to Edgar Allan Poe's works. It is just a brilliant execution, and I was blown away by how well it was done. I just was so amazed. He's got a child named Frederick. He's got a child named Victorine Lafricade, who is a character from one of the other stories as well. And she is the focus of an episode called The Telltale Heart. And he's got a daughter named Tamerlane. And each of his kids is from a different relationship, with the exception of Frederick and Tamerlane. They both have the same mother who died unexpectedly, and we won't go into that, but you can find out for yourself in the show. And then his other 4 children are from other relationships that he had, and he's been the good father and taken them under his wing and given them a part in the estate and everything like that, and they help him run his business, which is a pharmaceutical company called Fortunato. And if that name sounds familiar, Fortunato is the last name of a character in another one of Edgar Allan Poe's stories, which is featured in the book. All of these characters' original stories are featured in The Fall of the House of Usher and other stories. It's just magnificently done, and when you get to the end and you find out why Frederick's children all died, it just blows your mind. It's like OMG. And you get to find out the lengths that someone will go to live the life that they want to live, the life that they think they deserve. You get to see the darkest places within people's hearts in all of the children, not just Roderick, but in all of the children, really. And he has a sister as well, and she's pretty much just as despicable as everyone else. He's gotten to the end of his life, and he's confessing to Auguste Dupin, and he's finally feeling remorse. And all throughout the book, there is this one person who keeps showing up in every instance of the people who die. It's just masterfully done. It is so masterfully done. And one episode that really got me was episode 7, which is based on The Pit and the Pendulum. And I'm just like, we got to the end of that episode, I'm like, oh my God. Oh my God. That was, every single episode was just another banger. Guys, I can't recommend this show to you enough, especially if you are a fan of Edgar Allan Poe, because the way this was constructed, it was the perfect way to say thank you to Edgar Allan Poe for some of the best and creepiest literature. If you're wondering if the Raven shows up, yeah, you can see the Raven in the trailer. It's the Raven is going to show up. It wouldn't be a collection of Poe stories without the Raven. And by the end of the series, I was just in awe. Like, I was watching it with my daughter, and she's like, I've always said I'm not going to rank Mike Flanagan's stuff, but this is absolutely his best work. And she's absolutely right. And I have not seen anything from Mike Flanagan that I don't like yet. And everything he does just keeps getting better. He just keeps outdoing himself every single time. And I've watched, I think this is the 5th show that he's created that I've watched. So yeah, there's The Haunting of Hill House, The Haunting of Bly Manor, Midnight Mass, The Midnight Club, and now Fall of the House of Usher. So this is his 5th show that I watched. And then we watched his movie Oculus in October as well. And it was just, oh, guys, you have to check out Mike Flanagan's stuff if you have not already. And this is like his magnum opus. Whatever he does next, I don't know how he's going to outdo The Fall of the House of Usher, because it is just absolutely brilliant. One nice little surprise in the show, again based on a character of Edgar Allan Poe's, a man named Arthur Pym. He is the lawyer for the Usher family in this show, and he is played magnificently by Mark Hamill. Absolutely brilliantly done. Okay, guys, I've got to stop here. Otherwise, I'm just gonna keep gushing. I would highly recommend that you read the book that the show is collected from, The Fall of the House of Usher and Other Collected Stories. It is specifically labeled as the tie-in edition to the Netflix series. I highly recommend that. I highly recommend you read any Edgar Allan Poe. But if you only read one Edgar Allan Poe, make it that one and then go watch the show. If you like horror, if you're a huge fan of Edgar Allan Poe, you have to do this. You have to. I'm not giving you an option. Well, yeah, of course I'm giving you an option. I can't force you. Or can I? What will it take to get you to do this for me? I'm kidding. I'm kidding. Guys, thank you so much for joining me on this video today. Let me know in the comments below, have you read Edgar Allan Poe? Are you a fan? What is one of your favorite stories of Edgar Allan Poe's? Have you watched the show yet? Let me know in the comments below as well. And guys, I will catch you next time. Make sure you read more books.